New emergency early release arrangements for some prisoners have been put in place. Bail hearings delayed. The prisons are full to bursting. Labour today tried to draw attention to that. Keir Starmer asked the Prime Minister a question to which he already knew the answer.
Are any of the prisoners he is currently letting out early considered to be high risk?
Let me be crystal clear. No one would be put on the scheme if they were deemed a threat to the public.
But Keir Starmer quoted back the official report published yesterday, pointing out failures in the early release scheme. The prison inspector's report on Lewis Prison said a high-risk prisoner had his release brought forward despite having a history of stalking, domestic abuse and being subject to a restraining order. He was a risk to children and subject to an exclusion zone that included the local authority trying to house him. The report went on, some appeals for the original release date for prisoners to be reinstated, supported by managers in the prison, have been turned down despite clear risk issues.
Does the early release of stalkers, domestic abusers and those considered a risk to children sound like the work of someone who is making the country more secure?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, no one should be put on this scheme if they are a threat to the public. And let me be crystal clear, it does not apply. And let me be absolutely clear, it does not apply to anyone serving a life sentence, anyone convicted of a serious violent offence.
Some said selection for early release just couldn't be properly run.
There's too much pressure on prison governors and prison officers to be able to get people out of prison. They've already got a lot of firefighting to do. The prisons are all full. There aren't enough staff. There are too many people. People are locked in their cells for 22 hours of a day. You know, that this is a system that is on its knees.
In another effort to relieve pressure on prison numbers, the government today announced it would delay some bail hearings.
Those cases which are bailed are not going to be heard in the Crown Court until 2025. In some courts in this country, we are hearing of listings in 2026. Now, that, of course, means that victims, witnesses and defendants are having to wait such a long period of time for their trials to come in.
Labour was enjoying the government's discomfort over prison overcrowding today. But at the top of the party, some think they themselves could soon be faced with the same problems, trying to match the rhetoric on tougher sentences with the limited budget for prison places, and themselves perhaps having to contemplate lighter sentences for some offences, something for which the public doesn't seem to have a huge appetite.
Well, the Conservative MP and chair of the Justice Select Committee, Sir Bob Neill, joins us live now from Westminster. Sir Bob, Operation Early Dawn, this emergency measure was triggered late yesterday, which meant that early this morning, magistrate hearings all over England could just be cancelled with virtually no notice because of a lack of prison places. Does that sound to you like a government that's got this under control?
It speaks of a real pressure in our prisons. I think it was necessary to do, actually, because we are in such a bad situation. But what it comes back to is, in fact, a history of underfunding of the criminal justice system under governments of both parties, not just under this government, and I've always said that we haven't spent enough on the justice system. Equally, neither did the previous Labour government either. In fact, probably going back 30, 40 years, we have not put enough resource into the justice system, and as you were saying in your piece earlier, Kieran, we've not had a serious conversation with the public about what the purpose of imprisonment is and who are the right people to be sending to prison and who are not.
Well, let's turn now to another emergency measure, the early release scheme, because as we heard there, yesterday the Chief Inspector of Prisons reported, quote, a high-risk prisoner had his release date brought forward under the scheme despite having a history of stalking, domestic abuse and being subject to a restraining order. He was a risk to children. And today, Rishi Sunak said in PMQs, no one will be put in the scheme if they were deemed a threat to public safety. Is what Rishi Sunak said true?
It ought to be, because in fact the scheme is designed to have serious safeguards. The Lord Chancellor has been quite clear about that, but it is important that that is delivered in practice, and I think that's the risk because of the pressures on staffing that there are in the prisons. It's not of itself, again, an unreasonable scheme. In fact, the Labour government ran an early prisoner release scheme as well back in the day. But it is important not only that we are very clear that anyone with a history of violence, anyone who's got a more serious offence, sentences over a certain amount, should should not be on the scheme, but we need to make sure that we have enough experienced staff in the prisons to enforce that, and that I think is the worry. In some cases,
but we know, Sir Bob, Sir Bob, that high-risk prisoners are being released, and stalkers and domestic abusers. So does that mean that it's not working, the scheme?
It clearly needs to be kept very careful monitoring on. It's capable of working. We need to make sure it does, and say it has worked in the past. But it comes back again to our point that we need to be more effective, cleverer sometimes, Kieran, about the way we triage the use of prison. In the end, most prisoners are going to be released. My concern is that because of the state of overcrowding in the prisons, and in particular lack of experienced staff, that makes it very hard to put in place the sort of rehabilitation measures and the pre-release measures which would make it much easier to reassure people that people were being released, let's say, into secure accommodation, into jobs, or had the proper probation appointments to keep proper tabs on them. That's the real problem we've got.
How many prisoners have been released under the early release scheme?
Now, since it's only just come in, I don't have a tab on that. I've asked, my committee
October,
have asked.
wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Our committee have asked for figures. We haven't yet received them. I have said to the ministers that, in fact, they should be releasing them in real time. They have not yet done so, and I think that's a mistake. We made that very clear. So we're continuing to push them to give us and you real-time information on that.
We would welcome that. Sir Bob Neal, thank you very much for speaking with us. Thank you.
Pleasure.